Hey friends, I'm so glad you're joining me today. Sometimes, a single wild moment can split your life in two, before and after. This story begins deep in Montana's Bitterroot Mountains, where a storm, a lost bobcat kitten, and one woman's leap into a raging river set off a chain of courage, danger, and trust that will change everything. If you've ever wondered whether a moment of kindness can bridge the wildest distance, this is a story for you. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you want to help me bring more stories of hope and wild connection to life, please hit like and subscribe to the channel. Your support truly means the world. Let's dive in. Caroline Miller had been hiking since dawn, hoping to photograph mountain bluebirds, or maybe the elusive elk rumored to haunt the lower slopes. Her camera slung across her shoulder, boots sinking into patches of melting snow. The air smelled of thawing earth and pine needles. Each breath was crisp with the promise of new beginnings. But spring, up here, was no gentle friend. Thunderheads massed suddenly, throwing the sunlight into darkness. Rain hammered the ground in icy sheets, pelting her face, drenching her hair, turning the old game trail into a ribbon of mud. The river, once a lazy snake winding through the valley, roared to life, swollen with meltwater, lashing against boulders. Caroline cursed herself for not turning back sooner. But her pride, that stubborn spark, kept her pressing forward. Just a little further, just a few more photos. She'd always believed the wild would reward courage. It was then, just as the wind began to shriek and trees bowed under the weight of the storm, that she saw it. At the water's edge, a flash of movement. A small shape, fur slicked and shivering, claws scrabbling against a mossy rock. A bobcat kitten, barely more than a few months old, its eyes wide with terror. Caroline froze, her heart thundering louder than the sky. How had it gotten so close to the raging water? She barely had time to wonder. In a heartbeat, a branch crashed down behind the kitten. Startled, it slipped, then vanished beneath the foam, swept downstream in the blink of an eye. No. The word tore out of her throat before she even realized she was running. She flung her pack aside and crashed through underbrush, boots pounding the riverbank, camera forgotten. There was no calculation, only instinct, pure, blinding, impossible to ignore. The kitten's desperate mewl rose above the thunder. Caroline saw its head break the surface, paws flailing, eyes rolling white with fear. Every muscle screamed at her to stop. The river was a beast now. Glacial cold, snapping branches, churning mud. One wrong step, and she'd be lost, too. But something deeper than fear drove her. She kicked off her boots, shrugged off her jacket, and dove. The shock hit her like a wall. Freezing water punched the air from her lungs, stung her skin raw. Her legs went numb, but she forced herself to kick, to stroke, to fight the current. She gasped, sputtering, arms outstretched, reaching for a blur of wet fur. The bobcat kitten spun past, a tiny scrap in a monstrous flood. "Hold on!" She heard her own voice, ragged, desperate, swallowed by wind and water. Her fingers grazed a sodden tail, slipped. She lunged again, locking her hand around a thin, trembling body. The kitten clawed blindly at her arm, its terror sharp as broken glass, but she tightened her grip and pulled, paddling with all her strength. The current snatched at them, twisting, dragging them sideways into a tangle of roots. For one blinding second, Caroline thought she'd lose her hold. Her arms were on fire, muscles cramping, vision tunneling. She slammed into the roots, scraping her shins raw, and clung there, teeth chattering so hard she feared she'd bite her tongue. The kitten sagged against her chest, half submerged, still alive, its heartbeat fluttering against her palm. She couldn't let go. Not now. She forced herself to move, inch by inch, hauling both their bodies through the icy surge toward the shore. Branches whipped her face. Grit filled her mouth. She tasted blood, tasted fear. Her boots, left behind. Her camera, lost. Only survival mattered now. At last, the river spat them out onto a gravel bar, slick with mud and melting hail. Caroline collapsed, coughing, dragging the kitten beneath her coat, shielding it from the wind. Every breath burned. Her fingers were white, nails purple. The world blurred at the edges. Pain, cold, exhaustion crushing her. But the kitten moved, a weak, broken cry bubbling in its throat. Caroline hugged it closer, using her body heat, desperate to keep it alive. The storm raged on, thunder booming above the tree line. The wild was no longer just something to photograph. It was teeth and claws and cold and the bright animal need to endure. As Caroline huddled there, soaked, shivering, heart battering her ribs, she stared into the dark wall of trees. Somewhere in those shadows, she knew, the kitten's mother was waiting, maybe watching, maybe hunting. She was alone now, with a wild life depending on her, and the question pulsed in her veins with every frantic heartbeat. Could she save the kitten? Could she save herself? She didn't know the answer. She only knew she had to try. Rain hammered the world into a blur, but Caroline didn't dare move. The riverbank was soft with moss and slick stones, half lit by the greenish glow of dusk fighting through clouds. She lay flat, chest heaving, arms wrapped tight around the shivering bundle of Bobcat Kitten beneath her coat. Each time lightning forked across the sky, the whole forest seemed to hold its breath, frozen and watchful. She whispered, "It's okay. It's okay, little one." Barely able to hear herself above the rush of water and the pounding in her ears. Her teeth clacked. She was soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her forehead, fingers numb, but she forced herself to move, just enough to unzip her fleece and tuck the kitten closer against her chest. It trembled uncontrollably, ears pinned, blue eyes wide with shock. She scanned the shadows, heart rabbit fast. She'd read stories of mother bobcats, their wild ferocity and the lengths they would go to for their young. If the mother was close, would she come for her kitten? Or would she see Caroline as a threat, a trespasser, a thief? Every instinct screamed caution, but the wild was silent except for the storm. The kitten mewled again, a high, aching sound that seemed to echo in every direction. Caroline glanced up the tree line, senses stretched tight as wire. For a moment she thought she saw something, a shape, too large for a fox or raccoon, gliding between trees, eyes low to the ground, watching. Thunder rolled, vibrating in her bones. Caroline pulled her knees to her chest, sheltering the kitten as best she could. She reached for her backpack, which by some miracle had snagged in the brush nearby, and yanked it closer. Her hands shook as she fumbled through the pockets. Emergency blanket, half a granola bar, a water bottle still 3/4 full. She worked one-handed, careful not to let go of the kitten, and tore the blanket from its packaging. The metallic sheet crackled like a firecracker, loud and strange in the hush after thunder. She hesitated. Would the noise attract the mother bobcat? Would it send her running or charging? Either way, she had to risk it. Caroline draped the blanket over her shoulders and the kitten, pressing its tiny body against her stomach. Her hands ached from cold, But she unscrewed her canteen and let a few drops fall into the kitten's mouth. It spluttered, then drank greedily, pink tongue darting between its sharp little teeth. Something about the simple act, giving water, offering warmth, steadied Carolyn's nerves. Out here, it was just survival. Out here, the boundaries between human and wild melted away. For long minutes, the world was nothing but the hiss of rain, the rumble of distant thunder, the damp scent of earth and pine. Caroline stared into the forest, straining to see. Every so often, a branch would creak, or the wind would stir the undergrowth, and her pulse would leap. Were those yellow eyes watching, out there in the deepening gloom? The sense of being observed grew heavier with every breath. She found herself talking to the kitten, half to keep herself sane. "You picked a heck of a day to fall in, didn't you? Bet your mom's worried sick. I'm just trying to help, promise." Her voice sounded strange, too loud, swallowed by the wild. Still, it felt right, like telling the story of what was happening might keep her anchored, keep her fear from spilling over. The sky darkened, bruised purple, and the rain finally slowed. The cold settled deeper into her bones. Caroline wondered how long she'd have to wait. She tried to remember what she'd read about bobcats. Nocturnal, territorial, mothers rarely far from their kittens. Did the mother understand what had happened? Did she see Caroline as a savior or as a thief? She pressed her back to a fallen log, letting the roots shelter her from the wind, and forced herself to stay still. Then, a sound, soft, deliberate, rustling leaves. Caroline's heart skidded. She froze, barely breathing, clutching the kitten tighter. From the shadows at the forest's edge, a shape emerged, larger than she'd imagined, fur mottled with wet spots, muscles rippling beneath. The mother bobcat. She moved with the silent certainty of a ghost, every step measured, amber eyes burning in the dusk. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Caroline did not move. The mother bobcat's gaze flicked from her, to the trembling kitten in her lap, to the world beyond. Rain dripped from her whiskers. She let out a low, guttural growl, not a threat, but a warning, a question, a boundary drawn in mud and moss. Caroline swallowed, fighting the urge to shrink away. She'd seen predators before, wolves once from a safe distance, bears through her camera lens, but nothing compared to being seen by something wild and fierce, up close, outnumbered, unarmed. She bowed her head, making herself small, whispering, "It's okay. I'm just keeping her warm, just keeping her safe." For long moments, the two locked eyes, woman and wildcat, storm-soaked, driven together by accident and need. Caroline's heart hammered, her mind racing. Was this how it ended? Would the mother charge? Would she wait? Would she simply vanish, leaving Caroline alone with the kitten's helpless cries? But the bobcat didn't attack. She didn't run either. Instead, she watched, a steady, unreadable gaze, and then, as lightning flashed again, she melted back into the trees, her presence like a shadow sliding through the wild. Caroline let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding, shoulders shaking. The storm had passed, but the tension lingered, alive in every muscle. She knew she couldn't stay here forever. Sooner or later, she would have to make a choice, move deeper into the woods, or risk returning to the trail, kitten in tow, never sure if the wild was friend or foe. But for now, all she could do was wait. Wait and hope and trust that somewhere out there, a wild guardian was weighing its own impossible decision. The storm faded into a memory of distant thunder, leaving the forest soaked, heavy and still. Caroline huddled beneath the slick crinkle of her emergency blanket, her breath visible in the lingering chill. The bobcat kitten, pressed against her chest, had stopped shivering so violently, but its body remained tense, muscles fluttering beneath the matted fur. It felt impossibly fragile, all bones and fear, with a spark of wildness burning just below the surface. Night was falling. The trees grew tall and indistinct, black columns against a bruised sky. Somewhere in the deep woods an owl called, low and haunting, and the river's fury faded to a sullen rush. Caroline forced herself to move with exaggerated slowness, careful not to startle the kitten. She gently placed it on her lap, cradling it between trembling hands, and unzipped her backpack again. Her fingers fumbled with the zipper, but finally she found a clean sock, which she used as a makeshift towel. She dabbed at the kitten's fur, whispering encouragements it could not possibly understand. "Easy now. There you go. You're safe, I promise." The words poured out in a low murmur. With each stroke, the kitten's breathing slowed. Its eyes, still glassy with shock, tracked her every movement, but it didn't struggle, didn't try to bolt. It was too exhausted for fear to take charge. She knew better than to try to feed it anything solid. Not yet. But water. Water was life. She uncapped her canteen, dipped her pinky finger, and pressed a droplet to the kitten's mouth. The tiny tongue flicked out, tentative, then greedy. Caroline smiled, a fragile hope kindling in her chest. They were both survivors, at least for now. Above them, the sky darkened to deep navy. Caroline glanced at her watch, saw that hours had slipped by in the blur of storm and fear. She needed to build a fire, but the wood was wet, and her matches were nearly gone. Still, she had to try. She eased the kitten into her lap, then fumbled in her pack for her emergency fire starter. Kneeling beside a fallen log, she gathered a handful of twigs and bark, shivering so hard her teeth clattered. A spark. Then another. Finally, a tongue of orange flame caught on the driest shreds. Caroline coaxed it to life, feeding it carefully, breathing slow and steady. The fire's glow painted golden light on her hands. The kitten, the undergrowth. For the first time since the river, she felt something close to warmth. The kitten crept closer, drawn by the heat. It gave a weak, hopeful chirp, and Caroline smiled again, the exhaustion in her bones momentarily forgotten. "You like that, huh? Can't say I blame you." She wrapped the emergency blanket around both of them and settled in to wait. The woods were different now, calmer yet humming with unseen life. Mice rustled through dead leaves, branches creaked overhead. Caroline's senses, sharpened by adrenaline, mapped every sound, every shadow. She knew she was being watched. The kitten's cries echoed through the trees, a plaintive, wavering wail that made her chest ache. She rocked it gently, glancing at the fire, at the shifting darkness beyond its reach. Then, something changed. The air thickened. Silence gathered at the forest's edge. Caroline felt, rather than saw, the presence, a shape moving with predatory caution, eyes gleaming in the shifting firelight. The mother bobcat. She appeared like a dream, her outline massive and elegant, fur bristling with droplets. Her tail flicked, the muscles in her haunches bunching and releasing. She was beautiful, wildness distilled into flesh, every movement precise. She stayed just at the limit of the light, low to the ground, her gaze fixed on the kitten in Caroline's lap. A standoff. Caroline's pulse hammered in her throat. She didn't dare move, barely dared to breathe. The mother's breath steamed in the cold. Her ears pressed flat, her whole posture a question. Fear, fury, or maybe desperate hope. For long minutes, nothing happened. The kitten, sensing the change, whimpered and tried to burrow deeper into Caroline's jacket. The mother bobcat crept closer, a ripple of muscle and moonlight, her presence a thunderclap of tension in the clearing. Caroline spoke softly, as if to herself. "It's okay. I'm just keeping her warm. I'm not your enemy." The words fell into the quiet, fragile as spider silk. She kept her eyes down, not meeting the mother's gaze. In every wildlife book she'd ever read, this was the moment things went wrong. The animal attacked, or the human panicked, or nature reminded you that you were small. But the wild, tonight, rewrote the rules. The mother bobcat circled, pausing every few feet, sniffing the air. She was wary, but not reckless. Caroline saw the conflict in her eyes, protectiveness warring with uncertainty. The fire crackled, painting shadows across her striped coat. Finally, the bobcat settled, crouched just outside the light, eyes never leaving Caroline. For hours, they stayed like that, a fragile triangle, each bound by a different kind of fear. Caroline tended the fire, hands steadying, whispering to the kitten, offering water and warmth. The kitten's cries grew softer, then faded into exhausted sleep. The mother watched, her tail flicking whenever Caroline moved too quickly. Once, a branch snapped in the woods, and the mother leapt up, teeth bared, before settling again. The moon rose, silvering the clearing. Caroline's limbs ached, but she stayed alert, heart beating in time with the wild. She felt a strange kinship, a sense that for a few stolen hours she was part of something older, something truer than her own life. As dawn threatened the horizon, the fire burned low. The mother bobcat crept closer, her eyes softer now, her body lower to the ground. She stretched out, her nose inches from Caroline's boot. Caroline did not move. The wild was watching, and for once, she was not afraid. The campfire's glow faded as night deepened, the woods stretching outward in a tapestry of shifting shadows and uncertain sounds. Caroline sat cross-legged, still as a stone, the bobcat kitten tucked inside the folds of her jacket, its tiny body pressed to her heartbeat. Fatigue pressed on her shoulders like wet sand, but she willed herself awake. This was no time for sleep, not with wild eyes tracking her every move. She felt the mother bobcat's gaze, sharp, weighty, impossible to ignore. Every time Caroline's hand moved, every time the kitten whimpered, the mother's tail flicked, muscles taut beneath her rain-dark fur. In that gaze, Caroline sensed not only suspicion, but the wild, aching love of a creature desperate to protect its young. She recognized that feeling in her own way, a longing to shelter, to help, to connect, even if the world insisted on the opposite. The fire snapped, sending sparks swirling into the dark, illuminating the bobcat's face for a fleeting moment. Amber eyes, rimmed with wariness and intelligence, met Caroline's. Neither woman nor wildcat looked away. It was as if time itself had shrunk to this circle of flickering light, this delicate, silent negotiation. Caroline took a careful breath. She forced her muscles to soften, to project calm instead of fear. She spoke low and steady, not quite a whisper, her words a bridge over the gulf between species. "It's okay. She's safe. I'm not going to hurt her. I promise." The mother bobcat cocked her head, ears twitching. Caroline kept her body relaxed, palms open, the universal language of peace. Her voice carried the cadence of a lullaby, each syllable meant for comfort more than understanding. Minutes trickled by, stretched tight with anticipation. Caroline tried to recall everything she'd learned about animal behavior. Avert your gaze, stay low, don't make sudden movements. But what mattered now was something deeper than technique. This was about trust, about giving up control and letting the wild set the rules. Slowly, she shifted her weight, drawing the kitten into the open. The little creature, still groggy and weak, chirped softly. Its mother responded with a deep, rolling growl, part warning, part yearning. Caroline froze, the world narrowing to the few feet between them. She held out her hand, palm up, trembling slightly. The gesture was absurdly human, and yet, in this wild theater, it felt right. The mother bobcat leaned forward, nostrils flaring. She crept closer, every muscle quivering with potential energy, ready to spring, to fight, to flee. Caroline spoke again, softer still. "You can come closer. I won't stop you." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grace so quiet it seemed like magic, the bobcat closed the distance. Her nose brushed Caroline's outstretched hand, a shock of cold and damp and wildness. The woman's heart thudded so loudly, she wondered if the bobcat could hear it. The mother sniffed her hand, then the kitten, who gave a faint, questioning mewl. Caroline did not move. The bobcat's breath puffed against her skin, hot and animal, primal and familiar. At last, the big cat gave a gentle nudge to her baby's head. The kitten chirped in response, pushing back weakly, and Caroline felt a surge of relief so powerful it nearly undid her. She released her grip on the kitten, letting it crawl from her lap into the circle between them. The mother bobcat immediately nosed and licked her young, checking for injury. The ritual of reassurance as old as time itself. The kitten shivered, then settled against its mother's warm body, eyes fluttering closed. Caroline watched, awed, feeling like an intruder and a witness all at once. For several minutes, no one moved. The fire hissed, rain dripped from leaves, and the wild drew a long, collective breath. The mother bobcat curled protectively around her kitten, but her gaze never fully left Caroline. She seemed to weigh the moment, considering whether to reclaim her child and disappear, or allow the woman to remain in this fragile peace. Caroline's limbs ached, but she stayed perfectly still, her own needs secondary to the invisible thread being spun between her and the wild. She let her eyes drift, not quite meeting the bobcat's. Every sense was alive, drinking in the details. The smell of wet fur and scorched wood, the sound of tiny paws kneading earth, the sight of raw trust flickering, tentative, incomplete, but real in the darkness. She felt tears pricking at her eyes, not from fear, but from the wonder of it. Out here, so far from civilization and certainty, two worlds brushed together. The bobcat mother could have attacked, could have vanished into the black pines, but she stayed. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe gratitude, or maybe a kind of knowing that didn't need words. Caroline realized she was holding her breath and let it out in a long, shaking sigh. "I'm sorry I scared you," she murmured. She needed help. We both did. The bobcat blinked, her posture softening. For the first time, Caroline noticed a scar on the animal's flank, a jagged reminder of battles survived. She wondered how many times this mother had faced storms, hunger, and loss. How many dangers she'd overcome for the small, vulnerable life now curled at her belly. Gradually, as the fire ebbed and fatigue became overwhelming, Caroline allowed herself to recline, head resting on her pack, eyes heavy. She left her hands open at her sides, a gesture of trust, of surrender to the wild's mercy. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was the mother bobcat, eyes reflecting the firelight, keeping silent vigil beside her own, and, against all odds, beside the human who had bridged the gap between fear and trust. In that quiet clearing, a bond was forged, not of ownership, but of mutual respect. For the rest of her life, Caroline would remember this night. The trembling warmth of a rescued kitten, the cautious acceptance of a wild mother, and the rare, raw grace of trust in the shadows. Dawn crept over the Bitterroot Mountains, a pale light seeping through dripping pine needles and mist. The little camp felt like it hovered in the hush between worlds, human and wild, hope and danger. Caroline awoke with a start, the chill biting through the foil of her emergency blanket. Her bones ached. For a moment she forgot where she was, until the scent of wet earth, smoke, and animal musk snapped her back to the present. She sat up slowly, blinking the sleep from her eyes, and found herself in the same delicate scene she'd left behind. The bobcat mother curled around her kitten, eyes half closed but vigilant, ears twitching at every sound. Caroline hardly dared to move, unsure if the fragile peace of the night would last in the morning light. But the mother only watched, her suspicion dulled by exhaustion and the shared ordeal. Caroline's stomach rumbled, a rude intrusion. She fished a granola bar from her pack, broke off a piece and nibbled. She poured a trickle of water into a shallow plastic lid, sliding it gently toward the kitten. The little creature sniffed, then lapped at the water with cautious hunger, its mother permitting the act with a wary glance. The quiet was interrupted by the raucous calls of jays overhead and the scuttling of squirrels in the underbrush. The forest was coming alive. Caroline felt her pulse slow for the first time in hours. A curious sense of belonging crept in, as if she were no longer just a visitor, but a participant in the story of this place. She studied the bobcat mother in daylight. Scars marked her muzzle and flank, badges of survival. Her eyes, rimmed gold and green, never left Caroline's face for long. Now and then, she licked her kitten's fur, pausing to scan the woods. Even in this moment of peace, wild nature was never truly at rest. Caroline stretched, feeling every bruise from her desperate swim, and quietly packed her things. Her boots were still soaked. Her camera, miraculously, had survived the storm, though it was caked in mud. She wiped it off, cradling it as if it were another rescued life. She knew she couldn't stay in the woods much longer, not without risking her own safety or the delicate balance she'd built with the bobcats. The thought of leaving unsettled her, but a new, sharper anxiety soon chased all other worries from her mind. A low, guttural growl rippled through the clearing. The mother bobcat's ears shot up. The kitten pressed into her side. Caroline froze, heart pounding, every nerve on high alert. The sound came again, closer this time, deeper, unmistakably feline. Caroline's mind raced. Another bobcat? She remembered reading about the dangers of males during breeding season. Larger, more aggressive, often deadly to kittens not their own. The bushes at the far side of the clearing trembled. Out of the undergrowth slunk a massive male bobcat, his coat darker, his build heavier, amber eyes fixed on the trio around the dying fire. He moved with the slow, deliberate confidence of a predator that feared nothing. Caroline felt cold terror claw up her spine. The mother bobcat rose, her fur bristling, teeth bared in a silent snarl. She stepped between the intruder and her kitten, every muscle tensed for violence. The kitten whimpered, flattening itself to the earth. The male advanced, emitting another throaty growl, a challenge and a threat. Caroline glanced around wildly for something, anything, to help. She snatched up a fallen branch, gripping it tight, her hands slick with sweat. The next moments unfolded in a blur of instinct and adrenaline. The male bobcat lunged, aiming for the kitten. The mother met him halfway, hissing, her claws flashing. They clashed in a whirlwind of fur and fury, the sounds primal and terrifying. Caroline's mind blanked, her body moving before thought could catch up. She leapt forward, waving the branch, shouting with all the force she could muster. "Hey, get back! Go!" Her voice cracked, but it split the air like a gunshot. The male bobcat wheeled, startled by the unexpected human intervention. The distraction lasted only seconds, but it was enough. The mother bobcat raked the male's shoulder, sending him skittering back, tail lashing. He turned, fixing Caroline with a look that seethed with ancient wildness and rage. For a heartbeat, she thought he might attack her instead. She jabbed the branch in his direction, making herself as big and loud as possible. The male hesitated. Then, with a snarl, he backed into the brush, vanishing as suddenly as he'd appeared. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Caroline's ragged breathing and the faint, frantic mewling of the kitten. The mother bobcat limped back to her child, licking its head, her flank bloodied but her eyes burning with triumph. Caroline let the branch fall from her hands, her knees giving way. She knelt in the mud, dizzy with relief and awe. She had interfered in the wild's deadly game, and for once, helped tip the scales toward mercy. But she knew this was only one battle in a world of endless danger. For the first time, she truly understood what it meant to survive out here. To be always alert, always on guard, to risk everything for those you love. Caroline reached for her camera, hands shaking, and snapped a single photo. Mother and kitten, battered but alive, pressed together in the dawn. It wasn't a photograph of beauty, but of courage, and the raw, uncertain grace of life on the edge. As the sun rose, painting the forest gold, she knew their alliance had deepened. They were no longer just strangers, human and wildcat. They were survivors, bound by the peril of nature and the wild, wordless promise to protect what mattered most. The forest had changed. The golden hush of dawn was gone, replaced by a wary silence broken only by the drip of melting snow and the slow, persistent whisper of wind in the trees. Caroline's heart still hammered from the encounter with the male bobcat, but she forced herself to gather her scattered gear, moving quietly so as not to disturb the fragile peace that remained. She glanced at the mother bobcat, who sat licking her wounds. The kitten nestled against her side, both of them watching Caroline with eyes that seemed to understand and forgive. She wondered how much longer this strange alliance could last. The storm had passed, but the wild was never done testing those who dared to walk its borders. Caroline felt a pull inside, a longing to stay, to protect, to witness this rare thread of trust. But reason gnawed at her. She was deep in bear country. She had no way of knowing how many more nights she could survive, or if help would reach her should she need it. But the world had its own plans. It started as a sound, a distant crack, sharp and unnatural. Caroline stiffened. This was no animal's call, no wind snapping a branch. She listened, straining to separate the forest's secrets from human intrusion. The crack echoed again, closer this time, then faded into silence. A flock of jays exploded from the canopy, their alarm calls slicing through the air. Gunshots. Her blood ran cold. She crouched instinctively, reaching for her camera as if it could shield her. The mother bobcat flattened herself to the earth, ears slicked back, and the kitten burrowed into her fur. Caroline's mind raced. Poachers, maybe hunters ignoring the law, or men looking for pelts, or even just someone foolish enough to fire blindly in the woods. No matter the reason, their presence turned the wild into a new kind of battlefield. She crept to the edge of the clearing, peering through the brush. The sun was climbing, throwing shifting patches of light onto the ground. She could see nothing at first, just the shimmer of heat, the restless movement of the forest. But then, far off, a flash of orange vest, a figure moving with slow deliberation, a rifle slung across broad shoulders, a man, alone, working his way along the riverbank. Caroline's heart skipped. She knew poachers favored this remote stretch, where the game was plentiful and the rangers came rarely. She pressed herself low, her breath coming in shallow, silent bursts. The mother bobcat caught her unease and rose, fur standing on end, tail lashing. Caroline put out a calming hand, but the big cat only stared, every line of her body taut and ready. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Caroline's body responded before her mind had time to catch up. She scooped up her camera, her pack, and slid behind a fallen log. She waved frantically for the bobcats to follow, but the mother only hissed, her instinct for secrecy overriding even the strange bond they'd formed. Suddenly, footsteps crunched in the undergrowth, too heavy, too sure. The hunter was heading their way, boots trampling the delicate mat of moss and pine needles. Caroline swallowed, pressing herself deeper into the mud. She tucked her camera under her coat, its cold metal reassuring against her ribs. The bobcats crouched at her side, the mother positioning herself between Caroline and the approaching threat. It struck Caroline then. The wildcat wasn't just protecting her kitten. She was shielding Caroline too. The realization sent a bolt of awe through her, stronger even than fear. In the face of a common enemy, their boundaries had blurred. She heard the man's voice now, low and muttering, punctuated by the metallic clack of a rifle being checked. He was close, less than 50 feet away, his outline ghosting between the trunks. Caroline didn't dare move. Her mouth tasted of copper. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to stay silent. The hunter paused, scanning the undergrowth. The world seemed to shrink to the thin slice of earth between predator and prey. The mother bobcat made no sound, but her body was coiled, every muscle primed to strike if necessary. The kitten was a silent shadow, eyes huge and shining. Caroline's mind spun through possibilities: run and risk exposing herself and the bobcats, or stay and hope the hunter passed by. She gripped a rock in her hand, a ridiculous weapon against a rifle, but it gave her purpose. She glanced at the bobcat, and in that instant, their eyes met, human and wild, both equally desperate, both equally ready to defend. The hunter moved on, his boots crunching farther away. Caroline waited until the footsteps faded, then let out a breath so deep her lungs ached. She wanted to cry, to scream, to flee, but the bobcat mother was already moving, nudging her kitten toward a thicket deeper in the woods. Caroline understood. Now was not the time to linger. She followed, limbs aching, breath ragged, heart full. They slipped through the tangled undergrowth, keeping low, moving in silence. Above, a hawk circled, its cry a piercing reminder that in the wild, danger never slept. By the time they found shelter in a dense stand of young firs, the sun was high and the air heavy with the scent of sap and old storms. Caroline slumped against a tree, the bobcats curling up beside her, battered but safe, for now. She gazed at the mother bobcat, seeing her not just as a creature of teeth and claws, but as a guardian, her own wild protector. The woods were filled with threats, both natural and man-made, but trust had become their shared refuge. Caroline felt it deep inside, a raw, unbreakable bond, forged in fear and tested by the wild. Twilight crawled across the woods, painting the undergrowth in bruised purples and smudges of gray. Caroline pressed herself flat to the earth, every muscle burning from the long day of hiding, running, and hoping. The forest felt alive and trembling, a living thing holding its breath. Only the faint chirr of crickets and the nervous rustle of leaves hinted that time still moved forward. The mother bobcat and her kitten were only feet away, curled tight in a patch of ferns. The mother's flank rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths, her eyes never still, always watching for danger, whether it had claws or walked on two legs. The bond between them felt almost tangible, as if a thin strand of invisible thread linked all three, human and wildcat, their lives wound together by accident and necessity. The poacher was still out there. Caroline could feel his presence, a weight on the air, an itch between her shoulder blades. She had glimpsed him twice since their last escape, a hulking figure in worn canvas, rifle slung carelessly, boots crushing whatever lay in his path. She'd seen his eyes once, up close through the tangle of branches, hard, careless eyes, the kind that measured everything by its usefulness or threat. He was no hunter of need. He was a collector, a taker. Caroline's mind spun with escape routes. She rehearsed plans in her head, none of them good. Double back toward the river, risk the exposed slope, hunker down and hope he gave up before the next dawn. But each time she tried to imagine leaving the bobcats behind, her chest tightened. She couldn't do it. Not now. The poacher's voice carried through the gloom, ragged and sharp as broken glass. "Come on out, little kitty," he mocked, the words twisting through the trees. Caroline's fists clenched in the dirt. The mother bobcat's ears flicked. The kitten pressed closer to its mother, its soft mewl barely louder than a breath. Suddenly, a branch snapped, a careless mistake, a warning. Caroline's heart slammed in her chest. She pressed herself lower, barely daring to breathe. The poacher was close, his heavy boots coming straight for their hiding place. In the dimming light, his silhouette appeared, hulking and shadowed, rifle raised, eyes scanning the thicket. Caroline's mind raced. She had her camera, useless as a weapon, but with one blinding flash left in the dying battery. The bobcats huddled, silent, trusting her in a way that tore at her heart. He paused, listening. The world shrank to the circle of fear and resolve around Caroline and the bobcats. The poacher stepped forward, rifle pointed now, his finger tight on the trigger. The mother bobcat tensed, her lips peeling back to reveal needle teeth, her body nothing but muscle and fury. As the poacher took another step, she exploded from the undergrowth, fur bristling, claws slashing the air, a living warning. She let out a shriek that pierced the forest, wild and ancient. The poacher stumbled back, shocked by the sudden attack. He raised the rifle, but the bobcat was faster, her swipe leaving a red streak on his arm. He cursed, swinging the butt of the gun wildly. The kitten darted deeper into the brush, crying out in fear. Adrenaline surged through Caroline. She fumbled with her camera, flipping the settings by touch alone. She waited for the poacher to lower his guard, for the moment when his eyes locked on the bobcat instead of her. It came in a heartbeat. As the mother bobcat lunged again, the poacher turned, aiming the rifle with both hands. Caroline raised her camera and triggered the flash, the burst of white light slicing the dusk. The poacher cried out, blinded, stumbling backward. The mother bobcat took her chance, slashing at his leg and sending him sprawling to the ground. Caroline scrambled to her feet, grabbing a fallen branch and waving it wildly, screaming as loud as she could. "Go, get out! Leave us alone!" Her voice was hoarse but strong, echoing in the woods. The poacher scrambled to his feet, shaken and disoriented. He glanced from the furious wildcat to the shouting woman, then turned and crashed away through the brush, cursing all the while. The forest slowly swallowed the noise of his retreat, leaving only the sound of Caroline's ragged breathing and the bobcat's warning growls. For several long moments, no one moved. Caroline's legs threatened to give out beneath her. The mother bobcat, breath heaving, returned to her kitten, who emerged from the ferns and pressed against her side. Caroline dropped to her knees, overwhelmed by a flood of relief and gratitude. She reached for her camera and checked it. Miraculously, it had survived, the flash a one-time blessing. She snapped a picture. Mother and kitten, battered but together, the wild's raw courage made visible. The boundary between human and animal had vanished. For one suspended moment, they were simply survivors, bound by the need to protect, to endure, to stand together when the world pressed in. Caroline met the bobcat's eyes. She saw not just wildness, but a spark of recognition, a mutual understanding that came only in the face of shared danger. Night deepened around them. Caroline pressed her back to a tree, exhaustion and relief competing in her veins. The bobcats nestled close. Somewhere in the wild darkness, the poacher was gone. For now. But the forest, and all its dangers and wonders, remained. Caroline closed her eyes, letting the stillness settle. For the first time since the storm, she felt something like hope. In the heart of the wild, human and animal, had become each other's shield. And in that fierce alliance, they had both found a reason to fight. The forest after danger was never truly quiet, but the tension that had knotted every muscle in Caroline's body began to ease as darkness deepened around her and the bobcats. The threat of the poacher lingered in her mind, yet his crashing retreat through the undergrowth had faded into distant memory, swallowed by the night and the unending chorus of crickets, frogs, and the soft sighing of wind through pine needles. It was as if the world itself recognized what they had survived and now offered them this fragile lull, a pause, not a promise. Caroline's limbs trembled with exhaustion. She checked herself for wounds, finding nothing but bruises and scrapes, the badges of a day lived on the razor's edge. Her hands stung where she had gripped branches and rocks. Her knees were muddy and raw, but she was alive, and so were the bobcats. Mother and kitten, side by side, pressed together in a patch of soft, needle-strewn earth. She watched the mother bobcat for a long while, admiration flickering in her heart. The great cat was battered, limping from the wounds she'd earned defending her child, and, Caroline couldn't help but feel, defending her, too. She marveled at the raw strength and fierce love that burned behind those wild amber eyes. As if sensing her gaze, the bobcat lifted her head, the movement deliberate, eyes catching the weak light of the stars and fire embers. For a moment, they simply regarded each other, a silent conversation passing between species. Caroline slowly reached into her pack for her first aid kit. She hesitated, wondering if it was foolish to try to help. But instinct and gratitude compelled her. She tore open an antiseptic wipe and held it out, arm trembling. The bobcat's nostrils flared. She did not approach, but neither did she flee. The kitten watched, big eyes shining in the night. With slow, careful movements, Caroline cleaned the cuts on her own palms and arms first, letting the bobcat watch. "See?" she whispered, voice soft, as if speaking to a child. "It's okay. Just helps with the pain." Then she turned her attention to the mother's wounds. Inch by inch, she slid forward, heart pounding with hope and fear. She gently extended the wipe, letting the bobcat sniff. There was a moment, a wild, electric pause, where anything might happen. And then, impossibly, the mother allowed it. Caroline dabbed at the shallow scratch on the bobcat's leg, her hand shaking, her every sense alive with awe. The bobcat flinched, but did not strike. Caroline's throat tightened with emotion. In that act of trust, something deep inside her began to heal, some old wound she hadn't known she'd carried, stitched together by the wild's acceptance. When it was over, she pulled back, giving the animals space. The fire was down to glowing coals, and the night air grew colder. She wrapped herself in her blanket, tucking her knees close, but left the flap open, a silent invitation if the bobcats wished to share the warmth. They did not approach. Wildness still ruled, but the mother bobcat settled a little closer, placing herself between Caroline and the open forest, her body a silent sentinel. Pain pulsed in Caroline's side, a souvenir from her earlier fall, and her eyelids grew heavy. Yet her mind refused to rest. The events of the past day tumbled through her thoughts. The terror, the courage, the unlikely alliances formed in the crucible of survival. She found herself whispering, half to the bobcats and half to herself, "We made it. We're still here." A soft, questioning chirp came from the kitten, who wriggled closer to its mother, then, emboldened by exhaustion and trust, pressed briefly against Caroline's thigh. She stilled, barely breathing, as the tiny heartbeat vibrated through her skin. For a moment, she felt as if she belonged here, no longer an outsider peering in, but a small part of the wild's tangled story. Sleep took her in fits and starts. Whenever she drifted too deep, some sound, a branch shifting, the rustle of fur, the distant hoot of an owl, would pull her back. Each time she saw the mother bobcat, eyes reflecting the faint glow of the embers, always awake, always watching. And each time, a sense of safety washed over her, a certainty she'd never felt in any city or home. As the night deepened, the ache in Caroline's body softened, replaced by something like gratitude. She realized she had come to these mountains chasing images, pictures of wildness and freedom to fill her camera and portfolio. But what she'd found was harder to name and far more precious. The courage to surrender control, the humility to accept help, and the ability to trust, not only in herself but in the wild that surrounded her. In the darkest hours before dawn, Caroline woke to the feel of fur against her ankle. The kitten, emboldened by the warmth and quiet, had curled beside her in sleep. The mother bobcat lay on the other side, not touching, but close enough that their shared presence felt like a blanket all its own. Tears prickled at Caroline's eyes, not from pain, but from a fullness she hadn't known she was missing. She lay awake, studying the rough, beautiful outlines of her companions. Her breath slowed, matching the deep, rhythmic inhalations of the bobcats. She thought of her own fears, of being alone, of never belonging, of failing herself and others, and saw them reflected in the world around her. answered by courage, instinct, and a kind of wild grace she could never have predicted. In those hours, a healing happened, not just in wounds, but in hearts and minds. By the time the first hint of sunrise touched the tips of the trees, Caroline knew she would never again see the wild as only a place of danger. It was, sometimes, the greatest teacher and protector a person could hope for. Dawn crept silently into the forest, soft and gold, painting long stripes of light across the dew-wet ground. Caroline stirred, the ache in her body gentler now, the panic of the last day replaced by something deeper, an ache of farewell she didn't want to name. The embers of her fire glowed faintly. The hush that blanketed the clearing was not just the hush of sleep, but of endings. Something inside her understood. This was the morning to say goodbye. She lay still, reluctant to break the fragile peace that had grown in the shadow of danger. The kitten was nestled beside her, curled in a comma of warmth, its breath a whisper against her leg. The mother bobcat lay a little apart, but her eyes opened when Caroline shifted, alert even in repose. They studied each other for a moment, and Caroline felt the old, familiar boundary, wild and human, watcher and watched, had blurred, perhaps forever. Her hand shook as she reached for her camera, not wanting to disturb the kitten. She took one photo, then another, each frame a silent promise to remember. Not just the image, but the moment, the feeling of belonging, the miracle of trust, the lesson she had come here searching for without even knowing it. The bobcat mother rose first, stretching her lean body in the golden light. The kitten yawned, wide-mouthed, and blinked up at its protector before scrambling to its feet. Caroline pushed herself up slowly, her every movement a quiet goodbye. The air felt sacred, as if the trees themselves held their breath for this parting. She packed her things in silence, careful not to break the spell. Her boots squelched in the moss. She checked her wounds, found them healing, and took one last look around. A photographer's glance, yes, but also something more. A woman seeing a place that had changed her in ways she couldn't yet name. At the forest's edge, the mother bobcat paused. She looked back, her eyes locking with Caroline's in a moment so electric, so raw, that tears pricked the woman's eyes. The kitten hesitated too, turning with a faint mewl, unsure whether to run or stay. Caroline dropped to a crouch, her heart in her throat, and whispered, "It's okay. You're safe now. Go on. The wild is waiting." It was enough. The bobcat mother gave a low, rumbling purr, as if in answer. Then she slipped into the pines, moving with the grace that only the wild truly knows. The kitten bounded after her, pausing just once. One last, lingering look at the human who had, for a moment, been its shelter. Caroline watched until the two vanished into the green shadows. Only then did she let herself cry. Quiet tears that blurred the world and tasted of salt and joy. The ache in her chest was sharp but clean, a pain she recognized as the cost of loving something you can't keep. She stayed there, crouched at the edge of the clearing, letting the morning sun warm her face. She breathed in the scent of pine and new grass, letting it fill her with something close to peace. The fear and loneliness that had haunted her for years seemed small now. Washed away in the river, burned out in the fire, softened by the touch of wild fur and the glint of wild eyes. Her thoughts drifted, backward and forward at once. She remembered the first moment she'd seen the kitten, that flash of fur against the river's fury, and the way instinct had flung her into danger without thinking twice. She remembered the terror and awe of facing the mother bobcat, the long nights spent forging trust in the dark, the raw violence of nature's peril, and the gunshots that had made every shadow a threat. And through it all, she remembered the courage, not just her own, but the wild's, the mother's, the kitten's, the courage to trust and defend and heal. Caroline stood and shouldered her pack. The trail ahead seemed different now, as if each root and stone held a secret she could finally understand. She took a slow step forward, letting the rhythm of her boots match the quiet drum of her heart. The bobcats were gone, but their presence lingered, echoes in the brush, in the hush of dawn, in the memory of wild grace. As she walked, she felt the world expanding inside her. She was no longer just an observer, a photographer capturing moments to display behind glass. She was a participant, woven into the fabric of this place, responsible for its stories and its survival. She carried with her not just the memory of rescue and fear, but a sense of purpose, a calling to protect the wild and the fragile threads that connect every living thing. The sun climbed higher, and with each step, Caroline felt herself changing. Her fears, once sharp and constant, had become guideposts, showing her how to live more fully, how to risk loving what was wild and untamable. She realized that to truly belong, to any place, to any moment, you had to let go and hold on at once. Let go of control, of certainty, of the idea that you could keep what was never yours. Hold on to the lesson, to the memory, to the sense of wonder that made you reach out in the first place. She paused at a bend in the trail, looking back one last time at the forest that had taken her in, tested her, and returned her to herself. "Thank you," she whispered. Words carried on the morning breeze. And then she turned, walking toward the future, every step echoing with the wild grace she'd learned to trust. Months passed, but the memories of the Bitterroot Mountains never faded from Caroline's mind. Back in her small Montana home, nestled at the edge of a different forest, she found herself changed in ways both subtle and profound. Every morning, sunlight spilled through her window in the same golden hue that had once lit the clearing where she'd forged a bond with the bobcats. But now, each ray of light seemed to hold a deeper meaning, a promise that wildness was never as far away as it sometimes felt. Caroline threw herself into her work with renewed passion, yet it was no longer just about capturing beauty for its own sake. Her photographs told stories now, raw, honest stories of vulnerability, courage, and the sometimes invisible threads that connect all living things. In each image, she tried to capture what she had felt that night by the fire, the fierce protectiveness in a mother's eyes, the trembling hope in a fragile life, and the quiet power of trust that bridged worlds. People noticed the change. Gallery visitors lingered in front of her photographs, drawn in by something they couldn't quite name. When she spoke at local schools, libraries, and conservation meetings, her words were laced with an authenticity that came only from lived experience. She recounted not just the facts of her survival, but the emotions, the terror and awe, the despair and the slow-burning hope. Listeners leaned in, hearts beating a little faster, as if her story touched some primal longing inside them too. She wrote articles and blog posts, detailing her journey and the lessons she'd learned. She uploaded the photograph she'd taken that final morning, a grainy, imperfect image of the bobcat mother and her kitten, disappearing into the forest at dawn. The picture wasn't technically her best, but it was the most honest she'd ever captured. She titled it simply, "Wild Grace." The response surprised her. Emails poured in, Some from people who'd had their own close encounters with wild animals, others from city dwellers who confessed they'd never thought much about the creatures who lived beyond the edge of the streetlights. Parents told her their children were now obsessed with bobcats. Hikers wrote that they kept an extra eye out for animal tracks. More than one person admitted to carrying a bit more respect and a bit less fear into the woods. Caroline saw the impact grow. Conservation groups invited her to collaborate on campaigns, using her images and words to remind people that the wild was not something to conquer, but to cherish and protect. She led hikes and wilderness workshops, showing others how to observe with patience, to move quietly, and to listen, really listen, to the language of the forest. Her story became not just a record of what had happened, but a living testament to the power of humility, courage, and connection. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she'd sit on her porch with a mug of tea, watching the edge of the woods where the deer would come to graze at dusk. She'd wonder where the bobcat mother and her kitten had gone, if they'd survived the summer, if the kitten was now nearly grown, learning to hunt and navigate the world on its own. She knew she might never see them again, but she also knew that their presence would echo in her life forever. The wild had changed her. It had taught her to accept fear as a companion, not an enemy, to value each fragile thread of trust, to recognize the sacred in the ordinary, whether in the brush of fur, the snap of a twig, or the mirrored gaze of an animal who saw her not as a threat, but as something almost kin. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, Caroline sat at her desk, sorting through photographs for a new exhibit. She stopped at a picture of herself, hair wild and face smudged with dirt, crouched beside a small, spotted kitten. Her eyes in the photo glowed with exhaustion, relief, and a kind of wordless joy. She smiled, tears welling unexpectedly, and began to write. To me, this wasn't just about saving a bobcat. It was about finding courage, respect, and kindness in myself and in the wild. It was about the moments when fear and wonder become the same thing, and when you realize you're not as alone as you thought. She hesitated, then added, "If you've ever had a wild encounter that changed your heart, I hope you'll share it too. If this story moved you, share it or subscribe for more stories of hope, wildness, and healing. The more we open our hearts to nature, the more we protect it for generations to come." She posted her words alongside her photos, not for applause, but for the simple truth of the offering. She wanted others to know that wild grace was not something rare and unreachable. It lived in every choice to help, every effort to understand, every quiet moment spent watching the world unfold with patience and humility. Caroline's journey didn't end with that mountain clearing. It became the starting point for 1,000 small acts of stewardship, planting trees, supporting wildlife corridors, rescuing an injured bird from the roadside, teaching a child how to look for fox tracks in the snow. Each act, each story, a ripple that traveled far beyond what she could see. Sometimes people would ask her, "Weren't you afraid?" And she'd smile, remembering the icy river, the mother bobcat's fierce gaze, the poacher's footsteps in the dark. "Of course," she'd say. "But the wild gave me something greater than fear. It gave me belonging. It gave me grace." So the story of wild grace became more than a memory. It became a call. Not just to Caroline, but to anyone who ever wondered if they could make a difference, if kindness could cross the oldest boundaries, if the wild could be a home and a teacher, not just a place of danger. And always, in her heart, she heard the soft echo of that dawn, the sound of wild paws fading into the trees, and the sure, silent promise that wild grace is never far from reach, if you're willing to see it.